All right, welcome to Lesson 2 of a Heartfelt Birth. Before we begin, let's just get a quick snapshot of what it is we're going to be learning in Lesson 2. We're going to dive deeper into what we began last lesson, looking at the connection between emotions and your body during birth. Learn more about reading our emotions, understanding our emotions, responding to those emotions, and then, of course, as in all of our lessons, we're going to get some peaceful practices at the end that help us to put this all into practice, something we can do daily to practice peace. Let's begin by looking at how God has connected our emotions to our physical reactions. I want you to consider these changes that happen in the physical body, all in response to an emotional experience. For example, your heart. And I mean literally your anatomical heart at this point, okay? When you're stressed out, which is an emotional experience, or you're anxious, an emotional experience, your physical heart actually works harder in an attempt to get more oxygen to your body, which causes your heart to pound. That's why you feel your heart pounding when you're anxious. Let's look at our breathing. When you're anxious, your breath becomes more shallow in an attempt to breathe faster and produce more oxygen into the blood. Your stomach. Again, when you're experiencing stress or anxiety, an emotional experience, your digestion can shut down in an attempt to preserve your body's energy for an emergency. An emotional situation that plays out physically. And lastly, let's look at our brains. When you're anxious or you're under stress, the problem-solving portion of your brain shuts down, leading to unclear thinking and difficulty in making decisions. I'm sure you can imagine how any one of these things could be a bad thing in a labor setting, right? So let's talk some more about how our emotions work in labor. First, I want to give you an overview of the stages of labor. Then we're going to look at the interplay of emotions and your body throughout each stage just a little bit closer. First, I want to give you an overview of the stages of labor. Then we'll look at the interplay of emotions and your body throughout each stage a little bit closer. So in this diagram that I've created for you, I'm just showing a very simplified version of the major phases of labor. All right? It begins at the bottom of the triangle with early labor. When I say early labor, I'm referring to the portion in which you'd go from 0 to 6 centimeters in dilation. It generally can take 12 or more hours. Your contractions generally would be about 30 to 60 seconds long, with about 5 to 20 minutes of a break in between those contractions. Then you would go into active labor. Active labor, generally speaking, is you going from 6 to 8 centimeters in dilation. Can last 6 or more hours. Your contractions would be between 45 and 60 seconds, and they would be about 2 to 4 minutes apart. Then transition. Transition would be 8 to 10 centimeters in dilation. Could last between a few minutes to a few hours. Quite a range there. And your contractions would be between 2 and 3 minutes apart. Okay, I just want to reiterate, these are generalizations. This is just to give you an idea of what to expect and create categories in your mind. I want you to notice something in God's kindness. This triangle, the largest portion of your labor, is early labor, right? That's the lower block of the triangle and the largest portion of your labor. The longest time during your labor will be spent here. And it is also the easiest portion of your labor. And as it gets more intense, it should shorten in duration. And so that is a great grace from God, and I don't want you to miss that. Oftentimes when we hear someone's labor story and we haven't been through labor before, I remember hearing my mom's birth story with my brother, and I remember always, even as a child, I remember her saying, I was in labor with him for over 24 hours. And I would just picture this woman, like the women I would see on TV, screaming in agony. And I would imagine that going on endlessly without a break for over a day. And I just couldn't imagine how horrible that must be. That's not a good representation of labor. Not only does it come, the contractions come in waves, there are great breaks in between, and it starts out at its easiest and raises in intensity. So at the most intense portions, those are more likely at the peak of this triangle, not at the base of this triangle. Okay? Also, it's most important that you pay close attention to mom more than to numbers. Nurses know this to be true. Medical providers know this to be true, that the best nurse is the one who watches the patient, not the one who just watches the monitor. We know more about what's going on with people by studying them. And so I want to encourage you to pay close attention to mom during this time. If you are a support person, a spouse, a birth support team member, here's what I mean. In early labor, your early labor mama, she's going to look kind of like this, all right? She'll be lighthearted. She could generally go about life as usual with the occasional interruption for a contraction. She's fairly normal in herself. She just might stop and have a contraction for a handful of seconds and half a minute and then go on with the conversation she's having or the activity that she's doing. Mom can still be physically mobile, converse pretty freely, just with some pauses in between. All right, if early labor were a game, it could still be kind of like charades. All right, I mean, it's not Twister, right? She's not like running a marathon or doing anything crazy, but it's still pretty normal. Here's my warning for early labor. Don't act like it's a totally regular day. This is contrary to what many birth providers may actually say about early labor, and this is what I don't mean, okay? It's wonderful to be at home like it's a regular day. It's wonderful to eat a good meal like it's a regular day, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But what I really mean is, even though early labor is simple and easy enough, charades, remember, that you could go about your regular day, I don't want you to, because I want you to begin using your peaceful practices and your relaxation techniques early on, even with the very first contractions. Even, I would say, when you have practice contractions in the weeks leading up to labor. Why? Because I don't want you to be taken by surprise as the intensity grows. It can be gradual. It can be a quicker transition. But when those contractions become so intense that you need your relaxation techniques and your peaceful practices to stay focused and calm, that's not when I want you figuring out how to do that. I want you to use these shorter, simpler, easier contractions and this early stage of labor to practice so that you're already in a zone when they begin to raise in intensity. All right, then from early labor, you're going to go into your active labor mama who is not playing charades, okay? So active labor mama, she's getting down to business, doing the work of labor. Her full attention needs to be on the work of focused relaxation and working with her body. If active labor were a game, it's poker. Mom is focused and intent and quiet, and she's not multitasking. She still has breaks and can rest, But mostly, she's getting down to the work of labor. She's not likely to be chatty or conversational. You might be asking her the same questions you asked her in early labor, only she's not responding to you in the same way. At this point, everyone in her support team needs to be helping her to focus, minimizing distractions, supporting her, bringing her comfort, helping her focus however you can. All right, next you have transition labor, mama. All right, now we're on the last leg. This is the peak of the triangle, and it's the hardest it's likely to get. If transition were a game, you guessed it. There isn't a game happening during transition. Okay, mom's using every last bit of strength and focus to get baby here. Working with her body's changes and frequent, intense contractions to deliver baby. Mom may be getting hot and then cold and then hot and then cold. She may be taking off all of her clothes because she's so hot and asking you to turn a fan on. And seconds later, she's shivering and freezing and asking for a blanket and a robe. This is because of hormonal changes that happen as baby gets close to arriving. Mom may be getting surges of feeling nauseous. There's just a lot of hormonal changes going on. And mom's looking a little more like the face in this slide. Okay? Why am I telling you all of this? Again, it's because I want you more familiar with what mom is doing in the stages of labor as she follows her instincts and responds to the natural changes than I do want you looking at numbers. All right? Sure, you can use a timer or an app to watch her contractions, but you don't need to be doing that incessantly. There are better ways to support her once you know, hey, I really think she's in this stage of labor. And mostly you're going to be able to tell that by how mom is acting. And the reason why this is a better gauge is because not everyone's going to follow the pattern of labor exactly. You know, she might go from early to active labor quickly and then stay in active labor longer. Many things can be different, and I don't want you disoriented or thrown off by the numbers being different than what you expect. Watch mom and go from there. All right, there's your overview. Now we're going to pull in just a little bit closer and look at what's going on with each of these stages, and particularly how our God-given emotions either serve us or hinder us in those stages. We're going to begin with early labor. So even in early labor, you will quickly see that there is a direct connection between your emotions and the hormones that God has given you to actually get your baby here from start to finish. For example, one of the earliest hormones to show up in labor is one that God has given you to stimulate your contractions. This hormone has a nickname. It's often called the love hormone. Its technical name is oxytocin, but we're going to keep calling it the love hormone. So why would something very physiological, hormones, which are literally the secreting of a chemical into the blood prompted by the brain, why would this hormone be called by the name of an emotion, the love hormone? Well, that is because guess what causes our brain to secrete this hormone? Yeah, it's a feeling. It's an emotion. It's the feeling of love. Isn't God something? Science has still left us with some mystery as to what prompts the labor process for each woman and why that happens when it does. But we do know that this hormone, oxytocin, shows up and tells our bodies to start having contractions. It also shows up in regular life when we're feeling loved. Holding hands, kissing, even an intimate conversation with a friend where we feel known and safe and loved can cause oxytocin to surge in our bodies. So if this hormone that causes contractions is stimulated by feelings of love, what would be the best way to spend your time in labor, especially in early labor? Being in love. Or sometimes I even say date night. All right? I like to say create an environment during early labor that's similar to the one that made this baby in the first place. So early labor hormones, they live on love. So what are some ways that we can increase oxytocin and essentially the feeling of love? Well, one way that we can do that is by staying home as long as possible. Transitions between home and hospital can produce a lot of anxiety. And a lot of times in early labor, our bodies can't quite tell the difference between anxiety that comes from fear and anxiety that comes from excitement. If you think about it, physiologically, they feel really similar. When we're excited about something and we get those butterflies in our stomach and our heart's pounding, right? Those are similar to feelings when we're nervous or worried. And so a lot of times, even though it might be exciting, like, oh, we're going to the hospital, which means we're going to have our baby, that is excitement. It's positive excitement. Our body can still read that as anxiety, which decreases our oxytocin. We're just trying to keep anxiety totally at an all-time low. And staying home as long as possible really helps that happen. A car ride or distractions can be really challenging to stay focused and restful during that time. Rest is really difficult at the hospital. If you've ever been in a hospital, you know this. No one's leaving you alone to stay calm and focused and relaxed, right? There's lots of interruptions. You're likely to be being closely monitored. There's just a lot of hindrances to comfort. A lot of things that don't communicate that your anxiety is at an all-time low and your love's at an all-time high. I mean, if you want to think about it this way, who goes to a hospital for date night, right? Now, one thing that can really help this is having a doula. Having a doula can really help decrease the when to leave the house anxiety. Many couples are very anxious about staying home for a large portion of their labor because, especially as first-time parents, they're concerned that they're not going to know when they should leave. Now, having a doula who is a birth professional who's very familiar with the birth process and can recognize stages of labor readily, this can be a huge asset to you. She can be home laboring with you, and you don't have to think about, is this it? Is this it? Dad doesn't have to think, is this it? Oh gosh, got to make sure we don't have a baby in the car. I mean, that is the all-time biggest goal. Don't have baby in the car, which I would deter you from having as your all-time biggest goal. I think there are greater safety goals when it comes to labor, but I totally understand this, especially as a first-time parent anxiety. And so having a doula can really help minimize that fear that can dictate a lot of decisions in the labor process. All right, also a way to help those early labor hormones that live on love, how to feed them love, is to just, again, minimize distractions. So again, staying home helps this. You can also use a sign that I have available for free on my website. It's included in the course also, and it's just a sign that reminds people. It goes on the front door of your hospital room when you do arrive at the hospital or birthplace, wherever you're delivering. That just reminds those coming and going that you are trying to minimize distractions. You might have family members, you might have nurses who are attending you in this birth who aren't used to a woman laboring with this amount of focus, relaxation, and peacefulness. And they think that what mom wants is conversation. And it might be that that's extremely distracting. So it can just help to remind people what the tone is that you're trying to set and how you are really doing the hardest work of labor, which is by focusing, not by being distracted away from the discomfort. Another way to minimize distractions is, again, to put it in your birth plan, to have conversations beforehand about the fact that that is actually how you plan to labor, is with mental focus. And you need few distractions, alarms set low on machines, as few check-ins as possible, as few cervical exams as possible, all of that kind of thing. Another way to feed those early labor hormones, again, create date night. So if on date night you guys love to listen to jazz music and relax around your home and eat Chinese food, there's no reason you can't do exactly that in early labor. If you love to slow dance, slow dance. Being close to one another creates more oxytocin. Remember, it's date night. Relax, enjoy one another, be close. This is a sweet part of the labor process. Again, you want to decrease any type of anxiety. So you want to make sure that the relationships you have with the people who are surrounding you throughout the labor process are safe and comforting relationships. You want to make sure that you can rest. I often tell clients, think about early labor as your opportunity to plug in your phone and charge your battery. It's kind of like this. If I were to tell you that at some point soon, though I can't tell you when, you're going to be leaving your house with your phone. And I can't tell you how long you're going to be gone. I can only tell you, you will have to have your phone charged the entirety of this time. What would you do? Well, even in the weeks leading up to this, you would have your phone plugged in to an energy source. You would have your phone plugged into the wall. And every time you weren't using it, even maybe while you were using it, you'd be trying to preserve as much energy as possible. You'd have it plugged in because you would know that at some point, and you don't know when, and you don't know how long you'll be gone, you are going to have to leave, and you just want as much battery as possible. Think about early labor that way. This is your chance to plug in your battery. It's the same reason why you should eat. This early labor portion is the time when you are preserving as much battery as possible. It's important to note that of first-time moms who intend to not get an epidural and do end up with an epidural, more often it's because of fatigue rather than pain. So it's less often about the fact that I can't handle pain anymore and much more often about the fact that anything that could just get me some rest. Please hear me on this. The most important thing you can do in early labor, your greatest strategy, is to rest. You're going to need lots of battery for the journey ahead, and you don't know for how long that's going to be. You don't know if it's hours or days. And so leading up to your labor, and then for sure in your early labor, preserve energy, rest, take naps even when you're sure you're not going to be able to sleep. You're still resting your body. And then again, eat. Now, not eating while in labor is pretty common within our hospital system, but it's an outdated plan. It holds a variety of risk factors. In fact, it increases risk for all sorts of things. To put it plainly, your body desperately needs energy for the athletic event of labor. Again, eat. Not eating while in labor is outdated, and it holds a variety of risk factors. In fact, it increases a variety of risk factors. It exists from a time during birth that was different than it is today, when C-sections were all under general anesthesia, which is not the case today. To put it plainly, your body needs energy for the athletic event of labor. You cannot get that while also starving your body, and the most comfortable time to get the bulk of that nutrition is early labor. I will include a website in the next slide for evidencebasedbirth.com. This is one of my most favorite resources, and I highly encourage you to check it out. You can be able to find an article particularly about eating and drinking during labor and be able to do some more research there. But there's a variety of wonderful resources to be found there. But just remember, in early labor, familiarity is your friend, really in all of labor, which is why I encourage you to bring as many comfort items to your place of birth as possible. Why I encourage you to wear your own clothes, bring your own pillow, your own blankets, your pictures of your other children, Christmas lights, your diffuser, all the things you can think of to make that space as comforting as possible. Because again, remember, those feelings, they really matter. How you feel while you're laboring, whether or not you're feeling comforted, you're feeling peaceful, it matters. Your body knows. Even if you can fake it on the outside and make everyone else think you're totally comfortable, while inside you're going, this is my nightmare. I hate the smell of a hospital. Your body knows, and you can't trick your body. Understanding how your emotions work with your body helps you to prioritize caring for how you feel in labor, setting yourself up for a comforting space in labor, how that can actually play out physiologically during the birth. So you can imagine then that if feelings of love, comfort, and safety stimulate stronger contractions, particularly in early labor, then what has the potential to really diminish the productiveness of your labor? It's the opposite of that. Hopefully you guessed it. Anxiety, fear, insecurity. Exactly, which is why we're trying to avoid even that excited anxiety in early labor. So adversely, when you're having feelings of anxiety, particularly in early labor, that sends a message to the body that this is not a good time to be having a baby. When you are feeling anxious or stressed, it can stall your labor out or make your contractions less effective. And we do not want that. Part of our major strategy throughout this entire course is make each contraction count for the most it possibly can. Because guess what happens then? You need fewer of them to get baby here. Anyone in for a shorter labor? I know I would always be. So, all right. What we want is to not have that anxiety. See, God has made our bodies in amazing ways. And so if you truly were in a dangerous situation, and I'm going to be a little extreme here, but let's say you're running from a bear and you're in labor. You're going to have all sorts of signs of anxiety. Your heart's going to be pounding, right? Your mind's going to be racing. You're not going to be able to think clearly. And your body's going to go, ooh, I don't think this is a good time to have a baby. She's got all sorts of fear. Now, this is a great gift to us. Thank God he's given us this ability. This would be very helpful if we truly were in a dangerous situation. But if it's simply because we're not familiar with birth or we're uncomfortable in this setting, then that doesn't help us. It only defeats the purpose of what that contraction's there to do, which is to help your baby get here. So yes, your emotions matter both in pregnancy and in birth. There's something we talk about in the birth world that we call the fear, tension, pain cycle. And it works like this. It begins with fear. Perhaps this fear is there because of a previous birth experience. Perhaps this fear is there because of ignorance, because of just not knowing what to expect. And if there's anything that's scary, it's the unknown. Or perhaps this fear is there because of some other story you've heard or other people's experiences. But regardless, it begins with fear. This fear then plays out. Again, fear is a feeling, an emotion, but it plays out physically. And it causes our bodies to tense up. And we have this physical tension, oftentimes is instinctual. Remember that even those things we listed before that happen with your brain and your heart and your stomach, your breathing, you don't make a conscious decision to breathe faster. These are God-given instincts. They happen without us even realizing they're happening until our heart's about to pound out of our chest, right? And so this fear instinctually causes our bodies to tense up, many times in ways that we're really not even aware are happening. And because your body is tense, when you experience a contraction with a tense body, remember, your uterus is the largest muscle in your body, it makes it more painful because your muscles are working with tension and it's causing more pain. Your body's working against itself. And we call it the fear, tension, pain cycle because once that contraction's more painful, what's that going to cause? Well, it's going to cause more fear, which causes you to tense up more, which causes you to have more pain. And it's a vicious cycle. What we are trying to do with the peaceful practices is to really create a new cycle. And this cycle begins with peace instead of fear. This peace is anchored in understanding our bodies, and it's anchored in knowing that God will meet us wherever our bodies need to go. And that really, along with all these peaceful practices we're learning, fuels relaxation. And as my body is relaxed during a contraction, I experience those contractions and I experience this labor as being much more gentle, which then fuels more peace for me, which then fuels more relaxation, creating a gentle birth. This is what I hope for you. So let's keep going and just see some more ways that our emotions show up in the labor journey. Now here's where it gets interesting. The very same feelings of stress that would stall out a labor in early labor comes to your aid later on. Now I'm not talking about feelings of emotional anxiety or fear, but more just the hard work of labor, the intensity. And so I'm calling it stress, but I'm not talking about negative stress, more just intensity and hard work. So during later phases of labor, when the intensity has ramped up, like let's say in active labor, you get endorphins, which are intended to ease and minimize the intensity of your pain. And then these catecholamines, they give us strength when we need it most. I call it affectionately the Hulk hormone. I call it that because it's the same hormone response that moms get when, say, they need to lift a car off of a child, okay? We might know it also as adrenaline. It's a surge of strength that gives someone the ability to do what in a normal, everyday situation, they wouldn't have the ability to do that thing. It's God's way of giving you strength you think you don't have and may not normally have when you need it most. Another reminder that He has not forgotten us, ladies. It also means that you don't need to feel weak or discouraged if, at the end of your labor, you get a little frantic or a little wild-eyed, or maybe even a little panicky where previously you were calm and controlled. I'm going to always encourage you to seek calm and peace and control, but it's important and helpful to know that near the end of your labor, some of the natural hormonal responses can heighten your intuition and make you appear or even feel a little more frantic than you were previously. And it isn't simply because you're losing your composure, but there are things happening within your body. Again, the physiological and the emotional are interlaced in such a way that we cannot completely disconnect them. You want to stay calm and confident, but some of that intensity near the end is normal and it's natural, and it results in you getting a surge of the exact hormones you need to accomplish an immense task. And another really cool thing, another reminder at how well thought out this process is, how divinely designed it is. You get that Hulk hormone during pushing, which means it's running through your bloodstream and therefore through your babies too. That sense of alertness and hyper-awareness and strength that you have during pushing is also something your baby has. And so when they're born, they're much more alert and aware and ready to nurse. And guess which hormone gets released while you're nursing? Oh, you guessed it, hopefully. The love hormone, oxytocin, which isn't only stimulated by feelings of love, but then actually multiplies feelings of love toward who? Your new baby. I can't imagine a more wonderful thing to have lots of upon the arrival of your baby. More than love. But again, it's not just for an emotionally positive experience for you and baby. No, because when baby's nursing and you're feeling all those feelings of love, which hormone gets released when you're feeling feelings of love? Yeah, oxytocin. And if you'll remember what oxytocin does, it causes contractions. And actually, you're needing contractions right about now anyways, because we want your uterus to begin to contract after delivery to help expel the placenta and contract back down and minimize bleeding. There's so much thought in this process. You guys, you have so much reason to be encouraged. Okay, so we can clearly see that there's a beautiful plan for your emotions and your body to work together in birth. So now what? We agree that our emotions are a gift from God and that they are deeply connected with our bodies in general, but they're amplified in pregnancy and show up a lot during birth. That is great, but I also want you to be able to work with your emotions. I want you to learn to read and be familiar with your own emotions in a God-oriented fashion that serves you and baby. I like to think about our emotions as a gift from God that can be great indicators. Kind of like you would look at your dashboard or your gas tank gauge to see when you need to get gas, when you're running on empty, when you're good to go, right? Again, how we feel often leads us to what we do. But just like this gas gauge, sometimes our emotions are somewhat broken or dysfunctional, right? So they can be healthy or unhealthy. They could be helpful or unhelpful. For example, the car that I drive. For a long time, the gas gauge was broken. It was dysfunctional. It didn't work as it was intended to work. And so when I saw that I had enough gas in the tank, I couldn't just think, great, the gauge says I have enough gas. I'm good to go. Don't need to stop at the gas station. Let's go. If I were to do that, I would likely have ended up on the side of the road waiting for my husband to come pick me up with an empty tank. I knew it didn't work appropriately, and so I had to use a mile marker. I would set it to 0 when I got gas, and I would watch that instead of my gas gauge. So in that same way, we have somewhat unhealthy or dysfunctional emotions sometimes, just like we have healthy, God-oriented emotions. But that can change how closely we pay attention to them, or I guess I should say, how we make decisions in response to them. So God-oriented emotions are exactly what our hearts are made for. That's when our gas gauge is functioning as it's intended to, and we can respond appropriately and make decisions based on those emotions. Our aim is not to minimize emotions, but it's also not to just function wildly unbridled in response to our emotions alone. Sometimes Christians can really minimize the heart or our emotions, and we hear verses like, the heart is deceitful above all things, and we think, my goodness, that means I must squash the heart. Do not listen to the heart. The heart is the thing that will lead us away. Well, again, it can be, especially if it's broken or dysfunctional and not oriented the way that it should be. But ignoring our emotions can be dangerous too because they are gauges. So let's not let them be the loudest inner voice that we have, our emotions, but let's learn to listen to them. And most importantly, let's learn to listen to God and see where that gets us. Life tends to be emotionally noisy. There's a lot of voices, a lot of emotional clutter, if you will, a lot of inner discussion you're having as you go about driving, walking around, working, taking care of children. And then you add to that what you're listening to, music, podcasts, radio, audiobook, conversations. And you've got, likely, we all do, a really noisy inner life and a noisy outer life. Well, with birth, as with anything that's very demanding or difficult work, the noise of life, it kind of necessarily fades, right? As your work grows in intensity, so as you're doing something, the more difficult this one thing and the more demanding this one thing becomes, you're not able to multitask during that thing. Your thoughts minimize, they kind of hone into a laser focus, unlike when, say, you're bored and your mind wanders and you fidget. Well, this isn't happening during the hard work of labor. It's kind of like this. When you run a marathon, right, you don't talk on the phone while running. I don't care who you are or how athletic you are. You're focused on the run and the run alone, one foot in front of the other, making progress. And if you're not, if you are distracted, it's going to show up in your performance and most definitely in your endurance. Well, this is the same in birth. So my question for you is this. When that noise fades during the intensity of labor and you're left with just your inner life, what are you going to be left with? With birth, as with anything that's very demanding or difficult or intense focused work, the noise of life necessarily fades as your work grows in intensity. It's kind of like this. When you run a marathon, you don't talk on the phone while running the marathon. I don't care who you are, and I don't care how athletic you are. At mile 20, you are focused on the run, and the run alone. And if you're not, if you're distracted, it's going to show up in your performance and most definitely in your endurance. Well, the same is true about birth. So my question for you is this. When the noise fades and you're in labor and you're in a place of intense physical demand and focused work for your body, for your heart, for your mind, when it all fades away and there's not a lot of outer things going on and your inner voice is laser focused, what are you going to hear? What are you going to be left with? In the place of intensity that childbirth is, you'll be left with your loudest inner voices. And if those voices are not the hopeful and promising voice of God, they will likely be your own fear and doubt and insecurities that you've maybe not yet acknowledged even exist or are hoping and pretending don't exist. Or maybe worse, when a person near you speaks out of a place of fear or doubt, you won't have the clarity needed to filter it. And you'll be left to make decisions solely out of fear instead of informed and educated decisions fueled by faith in God. In the place of intensity that childbirth is, you will be left with your loudest inner voices. And if those voices are not the hopeful and promising voice of God, as our peaceful practices train us to do, they will likely be voices of fear and doubt and insecurities that you maybe haven't even acknowledged exist yet. Or perhaps even worse, when a person near you speaks out of a place of fear or doubt, you won't have the clarity needed to filter through it. And you'll be left to make decisions solely out of fear instead of informed and educated decisions fueled by faith in God. First, practice the presence of God as we lay out in the peaceful practices. I'm going to leave you with some peaceful practices at the conclusion of this lesson, and we're going to keep adding to it in the lessons ahead. And then let these practices help you become more familiar with the voice of God so that when the noise fades away, that's what you're left with. God's voice. I'm going to give you all sorts of tools to do just that. So let's go. Peaceful practices for this lesson. I want you to begin using the heart meditation on Isaiah 41 to infuse hope into your heart. Listen to the meditation and imagination portion of this audio. It's included in the course. And while you're doing so, try to relax your body physically. While you're letting your heart rest in truth, let your body literally be a physical representation of that. I like to say things like, go boneless, or you're jello, or you're a rag doll, or a jellyfish. It sounds silly, but these words, this language, it gives you a picture of what I literally mean when I'm saying to relax your body while you calm your heart. Let your whole body just be like a rag doll while you're listening to this truth. It's training you to do this on cue during labor. I've also posted a video on my YouTube channel that helps walk you through some ways that you can do this. I want you to try to do this at least twice before next week. Here's a link to my YouTube channel. I also want you to use the hand-drawn Isaiah coloring page that coincides with the meditation that you are relaxing to. This was hand-drawn by Becky with apples of gold lettering, and it's intended to be a visual prompt for you. I want you using all of your senses to train yourself to be calm, peaceful, and relaxed. So color this page while listening to the audio meditation, or perhaps a worship playlist you intend to use in labor. As you color, have a prayerful heart, casting your cares on the one who knows all of your days and your birth story. Commit to entrusting this story and your preparations to him. And then hang that in the room you're laboring in and let it be a visual cue to do just that. Remember, you've also already walked through the peaceful processing, and you've integrated a journaling habit into your practices. So you're becoming more and more aware, more and more in tune with what is going on for you emotionally in preparation for this birth. Don't forget to utilize your habit tracker to visually monitor your progress as you grow. May you find loads of encouragement. And don't forget to utilize your habit tracker to visually monitor your progress. Remember, practice makes peaceful. The goal isn't just to load you up with a lot of ideas. The goal is that you would have practical things that literally train yourself towards peace. May you find loads of encouragement as you practice peace, pursuing a heartfelt birth that leaves you with both calm and confident emotions in response to labor. As God's word reminds us in Proverbs 27, as water reflects the face, so the heart reflects the person. And my hope for you is that through this course and through practicing peace with the peaceful practices, the person you see staring back at you in your reflection becomes a more and more peaceful woman, anchored deeply, solidly in truth.